Okay, good evening, everybody. We will call this meeting to order. Sego ani buju endio wachaya kwekwe. As the mayor of the city of Kingston, I offer these words in the spirit of this gathering. Let us bring our good minds and hearts together as one to honor and celebrate these traditional lands as a gathering place of the original peoples and their ancestors who were entrusted to care for Mother Earth since time immemorial. It is with deep humility that we acknowledge and offer our gratitude for their contributions to this community, having respect for all as we share the space now and walk side by side into the future. So we were just meeting in Committee of the Whole closed meeting. We discussed one item with respect to affordable housing. So I will ask for a motion to rise.
Moved by Councillor Hutchison, seconded by Councillor McLaren. Rise from the Committee of the Whole closed meeting without reporting.
All those in favor? Opposed? And that's carried. Okay, next we have the approval of the addeds. We have two motions of condolence to add to our agenda. Can I have a mover for the addeds, please? Moved by Deputy Mayor Neal, seconded by Councillor Chappelle. All those in favor? Opposed? And that's carried. Okay, are there any disclosures of potential pecuniary interest? Councillor Osterhoff.
Thank you. Can you hear me? Yes, thank you. With the council meeting number 2020-20, declare my pecuniary interest in the matter of clause 1, report number 65, the award of a fire alarm contract, as I am also professionally involved in the fire alarm industry. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Thank you very much. Seeing no other declarations, we will continue on. We have no presentations this evening. We do have one delegation. Gilles Charette, Executive Director, HIV/AIDS Regional Services, will appear before Council to speak to Clause 3 of Report Number 66 received from the CAO with respect to the Social Services Provincial Funding Allocation. So, Mr. Charette, you have the floor, and just a reminder, you have 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mayor Patterson and Council, for allowing me to provide you with an update on the activities of the Integrated Care Hub, which is currently located at Artillery Park. After 10 days of soft opening, while we assembled the fantastic team that we have of staff and community partners, the Care Hub began providing service around the clock on July 31st. Since then, the hub has averaged 250 visits each day. Over 100 meals have been served daily thanks to our partnership with Loving Hands, Lion Hearts, and other community partners. As of August 28th, so just a few days ago, 103 unique individuals have accessed the rest zone, and we've had an occupancy of 536 room nights. In fact, for the past 12 consecutive days, the rest zone has been at capacity. Now, each of these individuals have completed intakes and now are registered in the housing database. And while we don't have the stats available to us right now, we know that a number of individuals have either been successfully housed or are currently in the process of being housed. Now, a little over a week ago, the Consumption and Treatment Service finally received the approval from Health Canada to move to the hub site. In that first week, there were 132 visits to the CTS. Now, this is compared to 164 in the entire month of July. And yesterday, there were 33 visits, which is the busiest day since the CTS opened in Kingston. 12 new individuals have accessed the CTS who have never been there before, and many returned who have lapsed because of its proximity to other services in the hub. So where the hub model really shines is how it brings together community partners on one site to bring services to the people we serve. You might recall when I presented in June, the hub model functions on 5 core pillars, the first of which is stabilization. So to do this, individuals need to be provided with a safe environment where they can build trust relationships with their peers, as well as with service providers. So to illustrate this, I wanted to share an example from our nurse, Eveline, who is seconded to us from AMHS. Since the hub began operations, dozens of referrals have been made to mental health services. The great news is that almost 100% of the individuals who have been referred have actually shown up to meetings with their caseworkers or with a physician. And clients who have been successfully referred to psychiatry have been stabilized on medication. Again, this is because they're building relationships with the service providers and the staff who can help them either to remember appointments or to support them if they're having challenges showing up. So here's a small and very specific example. The team at the Hub has been working with an individual who spent much of his time either accessing detox or accessing law enforcement, or engaged with law enforcement, I should say. While working with the nurse around medication adherence, it was determined that due to his level of literacy, providing blister packs for medication as opposed to a bottle would be more helpful. So the nurse helped to facilitate that. And as a result, this individual is now adhering to their medication, has a support worker in place, and has successfully accessed housing. So our ability to connect with supports, whether it's primary care at Street Health, AMHS, home-based housing, Providence Care, or the concurrent disorders program at KHSC, is incredible. And client maintenance has improved dramatically because we can actually find the people that we're trying to serve, versus in the past where we would have had to discharge people for them not showing up to appointments. So a small number of people have not been successfully able to access the services at the Hub due to the complexity of their needs related to either mental health or brain injury. All of these people have aggressive behavior, do not have anywhere to sleep, and are consistently revolving between either the hospital or the police doors. So as a result, wanting to continue to ensure that support and advocacy don't stop when access has been restricted, we've gathered with our partners at Kingston Health Sciences, AMHS, Providence Care, Kingston Police, and Street Health to provide ongoing case consultation for these specific individuals in order to support them to re-engage eventually with the Hub. So to sum things up, it's been an exciting and challenging month, and we've learned a lot. But the biggest learning from the past month is that bringing community partners together to offer low barrier services in a way that meets individuals where they're at works. And while the past number of weeks have not been without their challenges, the greatest challenge that we're discovering is that the need is so great that it currently exceeds our ability to meet it. So to close things off, I'd like to invite each of you to visit the Integrated Care Hub at Artillery Park so that you can see for yourselves the impact this model of care is having on the lives of those we serve. So I invite you to just get in touch with me or one of the managers at the Hub, and we'd be happy to give you a tour. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Mr. Charette. I'm sure myself and others will be happy to take you up on that invitation. So thank you for that. Are there any questions of council? Councilor Folland.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Thank you so much for the presentation, and to you and your team for all the great work in such a really short time period and such an important period for us as a city. So thank you so much. I'm curious, so the example that you provided is really helpful, but if you could maybe just speak to any information that individuals have provided as far as what their experiences have been like in the past and how this model is suiting their needs. And we make assumptions about that, but if you've heard from them firsthand, I'd really like to know.
Yeah, I think a lot of what we're hearing is around facilitating access to services is really impacting people's level of engagement. For example, if you remove the barrier of actually having to transport yourself to whether it's a housing provider or a mental health service provider, and you're actually bringing the provider to the individual, they're much more likely to engage with that service provider. The other advantage that we're seeing is that when people are used to seeing the same individuals at the same time, day after day, week after week, the relationships form, and then they're more apt to actually engage in conversation, let their guard down a little bit, and begin to talk about what their needs and wishes are in life. So whether it's to access, primary care or finally get onto the housing list, it's surprising to me. You would think that it would go without saying that individuals would want to access, for example, a housing list, but there's a great deal of reticence and suspicion out there, I think probably because of past traumatic experiences. And so having an environment that contributes to that trust building is really important. And that's what we're really noticing is helping.
Thank you. And also, I guess then just sort of along those lines, we heard from a number of residents at Bell Park that the the community building experience that they had there was really transformational. And I'm just wondering if you can shed any light on that in the current context. Are folks who are currently accessing services at Artillery Park, are they who have come from Bell Park, are they experiencing, do they feel, along with a connection to the service providers, is there still a sense that they have found a place that they belong in that site?
Yeah, what I'll say is there's a certain amount of repair that needed to be made as far as relationships. I think there was a mistrust sort of coming out of the gate. And I think part of that is just an unfortunate cause and effect narrative where, you may be displaced from where you're currently living, but here's the alternative that we're providing to you. And so we were really intentional around actually sending our team to Bell Park to engage with the people who were living there, and then also inviting them very specifically to the hub to have them consult with us on what they'd like to see happen. What I will say is, as a group, by and large, they have got each other's backs. And so, the community is already there. And so they're bringing, by and large, their community with them. And so there's not a lot that we've had to do in order to facilitate community amongst the individuals who are using the service. It's more reestablishing trust between service providers and then the people that we're serving.
Okay, next, Councillor Osterhoff. Did I see your hand? Go ahead.
Sorry, I have a very bad signal here. I apologize. There was a comment about that the needs were greater than the capacity. And I am wondering how much at this time, and are there any suggestions or ideas for that? What, how short are we? How big is the shortfall right now?
Well, I would say that, it's because of how we invite people to register, for example, for a sleeping pod, they're invited to come every evening at 8 p.m. to put their name on the list to get a spot. And so, as I mentioned, for the last, 12 evenings, we've been at capacity. That being said, people can, still hang out in the drop-in space. They, even though they, don't necessarily have a mat to sleep on, they can close their eyes while sitting in a chair. Obviously, the capacity issue is impacted by COVID restrictions and the need for physical distancing. Artillery Park is a very large facility, but when you're spacing people apart in order to manage the potential for infection, it does limit our ability to accommodate people.
Next is Deputy Mayor Neal.
Thank you. A couple of questions. First off, I want to say I really appreciate, I think it's a good model and you're doing good work. I have a couple of concerns. My first concern is that this clearly has been established as a temporary situation with, I believe, the end of September. And I know that it's totally made the pool and the Artillery Park unavailable to seniors and others that typically would be able to use that. I'm just curious, do you have any idea how you can make this sustainable beyond September 30th or beyond when you're able to use Artillery Park? Has the city worked with you for a future alternative location?
Yes, we've been working. Thank you for the question. We've been working very closely with the city, and in fact, they've been, really, I'll use the word aggressive, for the lack of a better word, very aggressive in trying to identify a location post September 30th. Obviously, when Artillery Park was offered to us as a temporary location, it was done while we were still in phase 2 of COVID reentry. We very quickly moved into phase 3 after that, and so there's recognition, of course, that the community would like to have access to that facility. That being said, our ability to continue is contingent on finding a satisfactory location to offer the same type of service model.
So I think Councillor Neal, that might be a follow-up question for staff too when we get to that item on the agenda.
Okay, I appreciate that. My last question is, I think the sleeping pods from what I've heard, are a workable idea. Obviously, there's a number of people that prefer it to going into shelters, shelter spaces. So I think that that's a success. What's troubling is hearing that there were 12 consecutive nights when they were at full capacity and that some people had to be turned away. And I know we're trying desperately not to have campers just relocate into the rough, into the bush. And I'm just wondering, do you have any ideas, especially now that there's been a forcible eviction?
So, Councillor, I'm wondering if this is a better question for staff.
I think it's a question for Hars. Let me complete the question.
Can you complete the question? Okay.
So I'm hopeful that you might be able to address how we can accommodate, because there'll be more people at your door now that we've closed down Bell Park.
Yeah, that's a really good question. And I think I would have to actually defer that question to staff, because as I mentioned in my first answer, it's, on a going forward basis, it will be contingent on identifying a location that will accommodate, the same or greater number of people.
I appreciate that. And clearly staff need to answer some of those questions. Thank you.
So now we'll move on to Councillor Kiley.
Thank you, Mayor Patterson, and thank you, Jill. I echo my colleague's sentiment that this is an excellent model, and I'm hopeful that we can find a permanent solution. You mentioned in your comments that a number of individuals that are accessing the services have been entered into the city's housing database. I'm wondering if you have a number on you, and if not, that's fine, but it could be a benefit if you do. How many people accessing these services are new to that database? So how many new people have come out that we're now able to register?
Yeah, that's a good question, and one I don't have a full answer to, Councillor Kiley. As I mentioned, there have been 103 unique individuals who have accessed the rest zone. What we have done is done the coordinated intakes on all of those individuals, unless they've identified that they'd already completed one. What we're noticing as we're entering that information into the HIFA system, that there are some duplicates, and then there are some people who have never accessed aren't into the database. That being said, I don't have the breakdown of what those numbers are handy.
All right, that's fine. I can follow up with that, but there are some new individuals. That's what I was wondering.
Yes, there are a number of them.
That is, have you been able to identify if any of the new individuals entering the system have come from Bell Park?
We know that some have. I don't know what the numbers are. And
Okay.
There are individuals who are accessing the drop-in space who were Bell Park residents, but who were not staying overnight. And then there were some who had begun to. And so I don't have specific numbers, but we do know that there was a migration from Bell Park over to the hub. And I would say that a lot of that had to do with some of the intentional work that our team has done in order to reestablish relationships with those folks.
Mm-hmm. And it's very good that you did, so thank you.
Okay, seeing no other questions, Mr. Charette, thank you very much.
Thank you.
So with that, we will move on in our agenda. We have no briefings. Petitions, we do have one petition listed in the agenda, a petition bearing approximately 31 signatures requesting the extension of speed bumps on Macdonell Street between Princess Street and Concession Street, was submitted to the office of the city clerk on August the 14th, 2020 by Joanne McAlpine. Are there any other petitions to present? Okay, so moving on, we have a few motions of congratulations and condolences. First moved by Councillor Chappelle, seconded by Councillor Osterhoff, that the sincere congratulations of Kingston City Council be extended to Mayor Brian Patterson on his election to the AMO Board of Directors, Large Urban Caucus, where he will champion issues facing Kingston. His voice as an advocate with this provincial body will ensure that we have a seat at the table in this post-COVID world. Thank you, Brian. Moved by Councillor Chappelle, seconded by Mayor Patterson, that the sincere congratulations of Kingston City Council be extended to Aaron O'Toole, Member of Parliament for Durham, on his recent election as leader of the Conservative Party of Canada. Mr. O'Toole has a notable connection to Kingston as a former resident and graduate of Royal Military College. We look forward to working with him to advance the interests of our community. Moved by Deputy Mayor Neal, seconded by Councillor Holland, that the sincere condolences of Kingston City Council be extended to the many friends and family of Terry Fleming, who was a longtime member of the Housing and Homelessness Advisory Committee. She worked for years as a champion for cooperative and affordable housing, and for many years in shelters and transitional housing, retiring as the director of Ryandale Housing. She is the beloved mother of Kat Evans and Heather Ruddle, and grandmother to Jack and Henry Ruddle. Terry was predeceased by her sister and longtime former city councillor Mary Fleming, and is survived by her sister Rosanna Parker. She will be sorely missed by all who knew her. Moved by Councillor Hill, seconded by Councillor Kiley, that the sincere condolences of Kingston City Council be shared with the family and many friends of Mac Freeman, who passed away peacefully on August 27th. Mac was born in Battersea. He was a longtime professor at the Queen's Faculty of Education. Mac was also an ordained United Church minister. He was beloved husband of late Eleanor and is survived by his children, Kate, Jane, Anne, and Peter, sister Virginia, and sister-in-law Dolores. He was a passionate educator. He retired as Professor Emeritus of Queen's Faculty of Education. He will be sorely missed by his many students, friends, and family. All those in favor? Opposed? And that's carried. We have no deferred motions, so we will move on to reports. First, we have report number 65 from the CAO.
Moved by Councillor Hutchison, seconded by Councillor Hill, that report number 65 from the Chief Administrative Officer consent be received and adopted.
So there is just the one clause, award contract phase 1, fire alarm panel replacement, life safety enhancements at City Hall. Okay, all those in favor? Opposed? And that's carried. Now on to report number 66 from the CAO.
Moved by Councillor Chappelle, that report number 66 from the Chief Administrative Officer recommend be received and adopted clause by clause.
Okay, so the first clause is 2020 final capping limits for commercial, industrial, and multi-residential properties. All those in favor? Opposed? And that's carried. Number 2, review of municipal green bonds. All those in favor? Opposed? And that's, Councillor Hutchison, are you voting in favor? Are you opposed, or did you want to speak to that item?
I'd like to speak to the item.
Okay, you have the
I
floor.
was expecting more questions, and I'm just interested in the question that's raised by the municipal green bonds report, which is really good and really interesting. Why it seems to be limited to big projects, and why it doesn't have more of a community economic development aspect to it.
Ms. Kennedy?
Thank you. Through you, Mr. Mayor. So the green bond market has not been developed. It's only been around for in the public sector, maybe the last 6-7 years. So most of the investors are larger investors, so they are looking for larger projects. Now, having said that, as the market is developing, we do have 1 or 2 what I would call boutique firms now that are looking to be sort of third parties to help in terms of issuing some of these bonds, and they are looking at smaller ones. So I think when I spoke to council about a year ago, I said that we'd probably be looking at a minimum of maybe $80 to $100 million issue. That number certainly has dropped, I'd say, over the last couple of years as this one boutique firm in particular has come into the market, and they are looking for smaller things. But with that comes a price. You wouldn't see the same discount to rates with the boutique ones that you would see with the larger issues through the banks.
Well, what I'm interested in is what level of investment or take up on the green bond would make it worthwhile for the municipality to do this?
Ms. Kennedy, go ahead.
So through you, Mr. Mayor, it's difficult to set an amount. I would say for the bigger bank ones, you're still looking probably around the $80 million mark. Having said that, there's also the ability to consolidate projects, but any projects that you put into the pool obviously have to have that same level of eligibility, or that same level of greenness in order to attract the investors within the market. So I don't think you'd probably want to go too much less than that, but like I say, you could probably go down to, and I'm, guessing maybe somewhere around the $40 to $50 million mark with some of the boutique firms. But certainly in terms of looking at the business case, then you'd be looking at a difference in terms of the variance of interest rate, or the discount that an investor is going to be willing to give because it's a green bond.
So that's if you're pursuing the green bond through the traditional financial markets. What's to prevent the city from doing it itself?
Through you, Mr. Mayor. So we don't have the connections with the investment world. So we would first off have to go through an investment broker like a TD Bank or an RBC Bank, and use them in terms of reaching out to the investors, doing the roadshow with the investors, presenting the projects that we're putting out there. So it would be no different than if the city was issuing our own debentures. Our traditional debentures, and we weren't doing it through Infrastructure Ontario, which the city has done historically in the past, I think pre-amalgamation. And so that whole process is managed by a broker like an RBC or a TD. The other piece with the green bonds that you need external support is you need a company that will also basically audit the greenness of the project. So it will validate that the project's eligibility up front. It will validate the green bond framework that needs to be created by the municipality, and then will also provide basically an external audit firm that provides an audit on each year on the results of that investment to ensure that that greenness is continuing, and the objective of what the investors were looking for has been met. So there's an external opinion on that as well.
Right. So I guess that raises the question why that, $40 or $50 million. I'm not sure I can see that happening. And that's what concerns me about the report, is that it seems to me we would be better off doing something for ourselves, which as a sort of a pilot capital project of a few $1 million, just so we can demonstrate to ourselves that we can actually do this. And it seems to me we can if we pick something like solar panels, which are these days, fairly easily demonstrated to actually pay off, have a good payback period, and actually make money. So I'm wondering why we don't look at that rather than look at very sizable projects that don't lead anywhere.
So through you, Mr. Mayor, just to comment on that, and I think referenced in the report, one of the recommendations that we've made is that we continue to follow our debt management strategies. And so if we were issuing a green bond, it would align with whether we were issuing a traditional venture or a green bond. It would be something that we already identified as being debt funded, as opposed to increasing our debt levels. So the example project that we did include in the report was the Cataraqui Bay sewer plant. And we haven't obviously done the work to determine the greenness and the eligibility of that, but it is one project that we identified the council has already approved $78 million of debt on. We are temporary borrowing right now from Infrastructure Ontario to do that project, but at some point within probably the next year or two, we will be permanentizing that debt. So that is one that already has debt attached to it and the council has approved. And we could potentially look at the market at that point to determine whether or not there's feasibility to issue as a green bond as opposed to issuing the debt through Infrastructure Ontario.
Okay, I did see that, and that's a good example of a sizable project that would be arguably green. I guess I'm concerned in these situations where the city seems reluctant to do smaller projects, where citizens could invest in the project themselves and get a return of a lesser sort, to be sure, but still a return that would benefit their city in something like, I don't know, like solar panels or projects of that sort. And where some of your criteria that needs to be done have to be done anyway. In fact, some of the criteria that are put down here on page, I can't really say what page it is, but are some of those criteria are what we would do anyway as a city, right? Like that's, it seems to me that it's that in the feasibility thing, it points out rules that you would follow in the analysis, and some of them we would do as a matter of course. So I'm not sure I'm convinced of the complexity, other than the fact when you have to go to the green bond underwriting market. I'm not sure it couldn't be simplified. If the city was willing to incur that debt at a modest level. And here I'm pointing to your own reports that point out that there's a leveling off of of debt incurred over the next few years.
So through you, Mr. Mayor, the challenge with that would be that now you're trying to issue debt without a broker. So you have to, first of all, find those investors, and those need to be investors that are willing to invest in what that particular project is. And then there would be a significant administration process to that in terms of the interest payments and just managing the process of paying off that debt over the years. Particularly if it was significant dollars enough to do that. If it was small dollars under our funding strategies, we probably wouldn't normally be issuing debt in the first place. So if you're talking larger dollars, then there would be that administrative piece on that certainly we wouldn't have the resources or the capacity to manage. We would definitely need to have a broker on board to manage that process for us.
Okay, just so we're not speaking on cross purposes here, I'm referencing, what I'm talking about is that if we wish to actually do something, then as described in the report, that's fairly onerous. But I think that green projects, and I think we're going to be, in the future, going to be forced to do these things if we're going to meet any of our standards that we set for ourselves and are generally set by governments in terms of green gas, in terms of gas emissions. So I'm just talking about, what I'm focusing on is the idea to do green projects. How you do it is, this is one way for sizable ones, and there's other ways for smaller ones. And that's what I'm encouraging us to think about. Thank you.
Thank you. Deputy Mayor Neal.
Thank you. There were a couple of things that we had brought forward. I believe my seconder was Councillor Kiley, and I appreciate that. There were green bonds, and we're approaching a year since that motion passed. There was also a green fund that we talked about. And I would love to do my planned giving to a green fund of the city, because we could indeed do some of the smaller projects through that. And one of those projects I want to point out, as I have in past council meetings, currently, and this is the one and only time I'll say this, thanks to the previous government, provincial government, we have this wonderful thing that allows municipalities to do green infrastructure through through local improvement. And the way local improvement works is the city grants the money up front. In this case, it might be solar panels, it might be heat through heat exchangers. Those kinds of things could be done. It wouldn't cost the taxpayer anything except over up to a 10-year period. They pay it off in installments on their tax bill. And the glory of this is that they would actually be saving more money on their hydro bill than it's costing them in taxes over a 10-year period. And this has been proven. Toronto has done this very, very successfully. This is the kind of project that could be done if we had the seed money that you could create through the whole issue of green bonds, preferably, but also through a green fund. Where are we at, Ms. Kennedy, on the green fund? Because I know last time I asked in the spring pre-COVID, there was talk of it was ready to come to council. It was, they had a promotional plan and everything. Where are we at with that right now?
So Councillor Neal, it's just that the item that's in front of us is review of green bonds. So it's not that this isn't a good issue. I think this came to council not too long ago, but regardless, I really just want to direct council to speak to the item that's in front of us.
I look forward to the answer to that question from the CAO and the treasurer in the near future. I do have some questions about the green bond. I agree with Councillor Hutchison that initially we don't have to make it $100 million goal. In order to get this started, as Ottawa has done, as Toronto has done with a much larger base, they've started but grown their green fund over time. And it's really been successful for them. They've raised a lot of capital and been able to do a lot of things as a result. When do you think the green bond recommendation that passed last November will be operational? That would be a question for Ms. Kennedy or our CAO.
Okay, Ms. Kennedy?
Thank you, through you, Mr. Mayor. So this report was coming back to council to provide some of the research and analysis around the potential to use a green bond. I think it's important to note that this is just a funding mechanism. So, and I believe the motion when it came forward requesting some of this information was around a way to accelerate some of these climate change projects and investment in green initiatives. The challenge with that is that this is no different than issuing a debenture through Infrastructure Ontario. So it will affect our debt limits and it will cost us interest, an interest component on it, no different than any other project that council would approve to have debt funding from. So I think first of all, if we're talking just smaller dollars under our debt management strategy, we don't issue a lot of debt for small dollars anymore. Not to say that we couldn't, but again, that would affect our debt limits and the levels that council has approved, which we don't want to go over, and it would affect the cost in terms of having to pay the interest. So it is available as an option now. I would say in some of the conversations I've had more recently with a couple of the brokers, certainly things died off when the pandemic hit. I don't think there's been too much issued in the way of green bonds since March. There was, I believe, 3 large issues, municipal issues in early 2020. I know in talking to a couple of my colleagues, I know the City of Toronto is looking at issuing one perhaps later in 2020 or early 2021. So they are out there. And I would say in talking to the brokers, they anticipate that there will be demand and there will be supply out there. So I expect that the market will probably heat back up and the dollars will be available. But it will come back to what council would like to do in terms of how much debt that they want to have in terms of using that as a funding mechanism. So it's available today, and the supply in the market, along with the types of projects that a municipality is putting forth, is what will dictate the interest rate that you'll be paying and whether there's a discount from what you would be paying with a traditional debenture such as what we'd issue through Infrastructure Ontario.
Thank you. So clearly, there's a strong suggestion that there's some pent-up demand as a result of the COVID shutdown or slowdown. I guess I'm just wondering. I would strongly suggest that something come back to council so we can weigh in on this and make a recommendation to make it happen. I would hate to see this get lost in the weeds after 2 years after the motion passed. My final comment has to do with the green bond and how we apply that to projects. And I'm a little troubled that if we're only looking at large projects, because there's a lot of opportunity for smaller projects. The other thing I'm a little concerned with, and I've seen it happen in the issuance of provincial or federal funding for housing, for instance. We end up applying grants that have been given to us for previously funded projects. I'm thinking of Wright Crescent as an example. That was fully funded. And I'm wondering how you might be able to ensure that.
I just need to interject for 1 second. So I'm not sure if you heard my 30-second warning. So I just need I'll give you a few extra seconds. If you just quickly sum up
Okay, yeah, that was my final question. Can we have some assurance that it won't kind of be applied to already funded money from other sources? That it will be fresh funds for new projects?
Ms. Kennedy.
Thank you through you, Mr. Mayor. So the recommendation, where staff are recommending that we do continue to monitor these opportunities. And there may be opportunities for smaller projects. So we're not saying don't do smaller projects. We're just saying we're issuing debt. And is it something that council will want us to do, to issue debt for smaller projects, which today generally we don't do. We normally just issue debt for the larger projects. There is the possibility to do that. Absolutely, we can look at new projects coming in. My thought would certainly be there is a lot of lead time to issuing a green bond. Council needs to approve a green bond framework that needs to be created. So there's a lot of upfront work to do. So my thought would be, as we continue to monitor the opportunities, that we are looking at newer projects down the road that are coming, as opposed to things today. Now, having said that, we certainly did identify, as I said, the Cat Bay sewer plant, because it's already got debt approved on it. But absolutely, we can look at new projects that are coming down the pipe. We're not necessarily limited to smaller ones. We may be able to put a number of smaller ones together and create something larger. And the other thing that we can look at that I think was suggested in the report is we can always switch out pay as you go with debt. So if council feels that they want the transparency benefits and to show the commitment by issuing a green bond and the commitment that comes with that to show that to the community, there may be the ability to switch that out and use some of our cash as pay as you go on a different project where we were going to issue traditional debt. So there are certainly options like that, which is why we've said we'll continue to monitor it. We'll continue to monitor the market and the rates so that we may come to a point where there may be some financial benefit. I would say there's probably not a lot of financial benefit today, but depending on the supply of green bonds down the road, there could potentially be some benefit for even some financial benefit at the end of the day. So we'll continue to monitor that.
I look forward to being able to actually vote on a green bond for Kingston. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Neal. Next is Councillor McLaren.
Thank you. You spoke of not many opportunities right now, and the report also speaks to significantly more complex requirements that we as a municipality would be facing. Do we have any estimates on how much staff time and administrative burden the municipality would face if we were to actually pursue this?
Cindy?
Thank you through you, Mr. Mayor. I don't have any specific estimates at this point as to what it would cost. It's certainly information that we could spend some time compiling and talking to places like the City of Ottawa that have issued green bonds. I expect certainly from the review that we've done, as I said, there'd be quite a bit of time up front, which would be both staff time, because to be frank, none of us have any experience with issuing green bonds. And certainly with my time here, I've done nothing but issuing through IO. So there'd be a bit of a learning curve for staff, as well as the external support that we would need for some of the validation pieces. So around creating the framework or the policy that would have to come to council, the review of projects and an external validation that the projects are eligible and have that appropriate level of greenness. Investors are not going to take our word for it. They'll want a third-party opinion on that. And then the one thing with green bonds is that there is an annual reporting requirement that needs to have an audit opinion on it that basically is reporting to the community and to the investors that the objectives, the greenness objectives have been met through whatever the investment has been, that the proceeds have been used for. I would expect that would not have a huge cost to it, but I would think that certainly it would have staff time in terms of doing the monitoring. Now, having said that, we do that now anyway, monitoring our GHG emissions and reductions in that regard. But certainly there'll be costs there. So I don't have an overall cost in that. The other challenge that we have run into is it's difficult to compare the cost to our IO issues as well. Because we don't pay an administration cost to IO, and except for the legal opinion, we don't have a lot of external costs with IO. So it's a bit of a challenge comparing that as well. But certainly there's more detail that we could certainly glean as we sort of took a step forward and if we identified some specific projects.
Thank you. And my second question is to do with IO Infrastructure Ontario. I understand they are a Crown corporation. Any are sort of kept in Ontario, is that correct?
Yes, they are a body of the province, and they're able to borrow money at provincial rates and then lend that money with just a slight premium on top of what that provincial rate is.
That actually does sound better from my perspective, because if we were to go with foreign investors, I would lining the pockets of Goldman Sachs or some other investment bank that might do this when we can actually do it here in Ontario. So I hope that any proposal that does come out can show how it's more beneficial for us and for the province to do it outside the province or for foreign investors. And that you might also show that the significant and complex costs be more itemized so that we can actually see the true costs as we go forward on the final vote on any proposals that may come up in the future. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, so with that, we will call the vote on clause 2. All those in favor? Opposed? And that's carried. Okay, clause 3, social services provincial funding allocation. Councillor Holland.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. A couple of questions. The first one regarding the OPHC funds that are only, that would not be, we couldn't use those with in combination with a partnership with the private sector, but could use them for a nonprofit partnership. So Lower Union is the project that's cited, and I'm just wondering if that's the only project, or if there are any others that we could potentially be directing these funds to.
Ms. Nordergraaf.
Thank you, and through you, Mr. Chair. Can everybody hear me? Sorry. So thank you for the question. As everybody knows, we have lots of different priorities in the affordable housing portfolio. Given the kind of the timelines of the specific funds and the need to obviously move the Lower Union location forward and kind of also have the supportive housing units that we are we're focusing on in this location, this is definitely the most preferred option.
Great, thank you. And then the next question is regarding the SSPF. Sorry, these are all new terms and new streams of funding, I guess. So those funds that are related to operating expenditures during this sort of short-term housing situation that we're experiencing, or I guess related to COVID-19. Is there any way that those funds could be leveraged for longer-term supportive housing initiatives? So for example, something like reconfiguration or renovation of any project that would support transitioning from like a congregate living situation to individualized areas for residents that might, or even to support any on-site services, kind of in keeping with what we're looking for in the future for supportive housing.
So I see both CAO Hurdle and Ms. Nordergraaf with hands raised. So whoever would like to jump in on that one first.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I'll get started, and Ms. Nordergraaf may want to add to this. So the first phase of the Social Services Relief Fund was to be utilized for operational purpose only. So we couldn't use those funds for capital purposes. The second phase, though, can be used for capital purposes. So it could be used for renovation, property acquisition, or operational funding as well. We are proposing to have the funds from the first phase essentially leave those funds aside, as we want to make sure we have some flexibility in case we do get a second wave of COVID-19 and we do need to draw from these funds. With the second phase, you will recall that with the Integrated Care Hub, we're only funded until the end of September. So following that, it's pretty critical that we find some funding fairly soon. And this is provincial funding that is that would allow us to be able to do that and secure essentially another period of operation until the end of June 2021. And we are recommending that a portion also goes to property acquisition.
I guess the final question is just then, do we have any sense that the provincial government recognizes that the situation that has been created and that currently exists will continue, and therefore that this type of direct funding for housing and supportive services would continue? Do we have any sense of that at this point? Or is this a matter of like a one-time investment of this money and then we're not sure what the future holds?
Mr.
Through you, Mr. Chair, We do know, so this is the second phase of funding. We do know that there may be a third phase of this same SSRF funding, but again, that's obviously not really in our purview to count on that. I think what it would be important to keep in mind as well is we do have ongoing CHIPPY funding, which is focused on kind of the full homelessness services. And we are using also the next few months to have a further review of kind of the full homelessness services. And we have ongoing conversations with other partners to look at kind of more sustainable ways to find ways of funding, for instance, the integrated care hub, but also just to kind of look at this in a more holistic way.
Thank you.
Okay. Yes, Councillor Hutchison.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. This report, of course, is more about the management mechanics of funding social housing than anything else. So I have a slightly technical question to ask, and that is whether it's noted more than once in the report that the approval of other bodies, for example, CMHC and the province, are necessary to firm up these proposals coming from staff. And I'm wondering what level of confidence they have in that regard. And are we likely to be back here rejigging it again? I mean, I see it's fairly easy to see what's happening there. That the criteria, the projects have changed, the criteria sometimes has changed, and so staff are having to move the money around in different envelopes. So is staff confident that this will be the last time we see this in terms of the mechanics of managing these projects?
Ms. Bordegraaff?
Through you, Mr. Mayor. So thank you for that question. So this is specifically to the social infrastructure fund component of the proposal, which we obviously, I cannot speak for CMHC, but we are quite confident that they will be approving this. It is unfortunately the approach that we always will have to take if we do receive provincial and federal money. And if things change, we would have to go to council to get that approval. But in this particular situation with the money for the social infrastructure funds, I know in the conversations that we've had with both the provincial and kind of representatives that work with CMHC on the approval, it sounds like everybody has the same kind of common goal to spend the dollars as wisely as possible and spend those dollars in the community. But I cannot guarantee that we will not go back to council if any provincial or federal funding dollars change.
Right. Well, I think that's fairly evident. Yeah. Thank you for that. I just want to say that, of course, I'm fine with this because basically it's just the mechanics of fleshing out a vigorous housing and homelessness strategy that staff and council have been working on. And we have different buildings we purchased, well, first of all, leased, and some we have purchased and will purchase. And the development of 1316 Princess Street, which hopefully with some senior government help, we'll be able to have more of a system now for transitioning the homeless up through transitional housing and into more permanent housing in the city. So I look forward to that with some optimism. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. So with that, we will call the vote on clause 3. All those in favor? Opposed? And that's carried. Okay, next up we have report number 67 from Heritage Kingston.
Moved by Councillor Doherty, seconded by Councillor Osterhoff, that report number 67 from Heritage Kingston be received and adopted.
Okay, so we have two clauses. If nobody would like any of them separated, we will vote on the report as a whole. All those in favor? Opposed? And that's carried. Okay, on to report number 68 from the Administrative Policies Committee.
Moved by Councillor Stroud, seconded by Councillor Holland, that report number 68 from the Administrative Policies Committee be received and adopted.
Okay, so there's just the one item, the 2019 audited financial statements. Councillor Holland?
Sorry.
Okay, not that one. Okay. There are no questions on that. We will call the vote. All those in favor? Opposed? And that's carried. Okay, now on to report number 69 from the Arts, Recreation, and Community Policies Committee.
Moved by Councillor Hutchison, seconded by Councillor Olsanic, that report number 69 from the Arts, Recreation, and Community Policies Committee be received and adopted.
Councillor Holland, was this the one that you had a question for? No, okay. Would anyone like either of these items separated? Okay, so we will vote on them. Yes, Councillor Chappelle, you'd like them separated? Okay, so we'll vote on them separately. So number 1, 2019 Housing and Homelessness Advisory Committee report card. All those in favor? Opposed? And that's carried. Number 2, appointment of Mayor's Arts Awards Nominations Working Group. Councillor Chappelle.
Thank you, through your worship. With regards to the Mayor's Arts Awards Nomination Working Group, there are a number of independent artists that seem to be mistaken, I guess, avoided, or they're not included in the arts and culture funding mechanisms. And I'm just hoping that with Councillor Neal on the appointment committee, that he can keep an eye out for some independent artists that are really struggling in our community this week, or this period. Thank you.
Thank you, Deputy Mayor Neal.
I'm a ex officio non-voting member of the committee, as all of the arts committees are. There's an agreed to formula for nominations and you know, there may be some names on there you don't know. There may be some artists who you wish were on there. All I could suggest is volunteer to be on the committee next year. And you're more than welcome to put names forward. But it's a very hardworking and a very, very good group. And it's a difficult decision because we have so many gifted artists in Kingston. And it's particularly difficult this year because there are so many worthy recipients that have been nominated. So my only suggestion, and I sincerely suggest next year, volunteer to be on that committee. So thank you.
Okay, thank you. So we will call the vote on clause 2. All those in favor? Opposed? And that's carried. Okay, we have nothing from Committee of the Whole information reports. If you have questions, just raise your hand as I read through them. Number 1, 2019 Development Charge and Impost Reserve Fund Statement. Number 2, Quarterly Report, Kingston Economic Development Corporation, Q1 and Q2 2020. Councillor Senek.
Thank you, Your Worship. Through you, I just have a question, and I see that Ms. Gillespie, our CEO of Kingston Development Corporation, is on the line from the report, and it has the stats of KEDCO's website. It shows that the hits on events and workshops, seminars was one of the top hits for the website. And I just wondered how attendance has been at those at those seminars. I know a lot of the seminars are on, e-commerce and expanding social media for businesses in Kingston, especially in COVID times. And I just wondered how those event seminars are doing, and if Kingston Economic Development Corporation is going to be expanding out those seminars like last year compared to this year. Is there the need to have lots of those seminars to help the businesses in every which way that they can?
Gillespie.
Thank you. Through you, Mayor Patterson. Most certainly, Councillor Osanek, we have seen since COVID-19 outbreak an increase in opportunity to offer online and virtual resources. We've partnered greatly, and you can see at the end of our Q2 stats that you have, the number of partnered events and activities has greatly increased. So whether it's partnerships with St. Lawrence College, as we've historically had, or with Queen's and Smith School of Business, we've partnered with the City of Kingston and KPMG to offer financial resource planning, as well as a network of Ontario small business centers. So we're provincially funded as well as one of 54 aspects throughout the province. And we come together more closely than ever to jointly offer workshops that would be of interest to any business owner or entrepreneur across the province. So that has certainly driven a lot of traffic and a lot of great resources.
Great, thank you very much.
Okay, thank you. Seeing no other questions, we will continue on. We have no information reports from members of council. Miscellaneous business, we have several motions. Number one, that the resignation of Alex Adams from the Committee of Adjustment be received with regret. Can I have a mover, please? Moved by Councillor Osanek, seconded by Councillor Holland. All those in favor? Opposed? And that's carried. Number two, that is requested by Melissa Asselstein, Little People of Ontario. Council proclaim October 2020 as Dwarfism Awareness and Acceptance Month in Kingston. Can I have a mover, please? Moved by Councillor Chappelle, seconded by Councillor Doherty. All those in favor? Opposed? And that's carried. Number three, that is requested by Sister Marilyn Larocque, Religious Hospitallers of St. Joseph. Council proclaims September 2020 as 175th anniversary of the arrival of the Religious Hospitallers of St. Joseph and the founding of Hotel Dieu Hospital in Kingston. Moved by Deputy Mayor Neal, seconded by Councillor Hill. All those in favor? Opposed? And that's carried. Okay, moving on to new motions. We have one new motion. Moved by Councillor Osanek, seconded by Deputy Mayor Neal. Whereas a healthy professional news media is essential for the proper functioning of civil society and democracy at the local, regional, federal, and international levels. Whereas the Public Policy Forum declares on its website for the 2017 report, The Shattered Mirror, News, Democracy, and Trust in the Digital Age, commissioned by the federal government, that real news is in crisis in this country. Whereas the U.S. Federal Communications Commission cited 8 critical information needs the media help to provide, including emergencies, other public risks to health, education, the environment, economic opportunities, civic and political knowledge of policy initiatives, and the conduct of public officials and candidates for office, The Shattered Mirror, page 4. And whereas Canadians have lost the essential services provided by roughly 2,000 media workers in 100 communities across Canada due to layoffs in only 6 weeks' time from the time the COVID-19 pandemic began, the time it became clear to the public just how important it is for Canadians to receive accurate information, and advertising revenues have plunged, prompting an emergency $30 million advertising buy by the federal government. Whereas residents of 190 Canadian communities lost 250 established news outlets, including residents in Kingston, who lost the Kingston Heritage and the Frontenac Gazette due to closings or mergers between 2008 and 2018. Whereas 2/3 of Canadians agree or somewhat agree that because of the coronavirus COVID-19 outbreak, the federal government should treat widespread media bankruptcies and layoffs as an emergency, according to a Nanos research poll of April 2020. Whereas the federal government allocated nearly $600 million in aid for Canadian media over 5 years in its 2019 budget, including a 25% tax credit for newsroom salaries, a 15% tax credit for digital media subscribers, and charitable tax status for nonprofit news outlets. Whereas Canada's federal government acknowledged in 2019 budget that a strong and independent news media is crucial to a well-functioning democracy. Whereas at least 6 municipal councils in Ontario have already passed resolutions similar to the one proposed below. Whereas recognized that a healthy professional news media is essential to the proper functioning of democracy in a city, and the news media in Kingston have been instrumental during the COVID-19 pandemic, ensuring local citizens have accurate local information. Therefore, be resolved, the Kingston City Council endorses legislation and regulations to support and rejuvenate news outlets across Canada and urges the federal government to move quickly to pass legislation to ensure an ecosystem for healthy news media, including local and independent media, to serve all Canadians. And that the resolution be forwarded to the area municipalities, local MPs and MPPs, and the Federation of Canadian Municipalities and Association Municipalities of Ontario. Councillor Osanek, you have the floor.
Thank you, Your Worship, and thank you for reading out that very lengthy resolution, but trying to get all the points across. So this motion is about local journalism, that being not just print, but print, broadcast, and digital journalism. Local news, it's an investment for our future. It's so important. It provides value to the public good. It also really helps the local economy because it provides an opportunity to showcase our local businesses. Think during COVID, the businesses that have been highlighted in the print, for switching over to producing hand sanitizers and PPE equipment, we want to hear about that at the local level. So important. And, it provides good advertising to the businesses too. It's so important for that. Think how different our news would be, our news coverage in Kingston would be if all the news was being broadcast out of strictly Toronto or Ottawa. We really need that local flair. We've seen over the past few years, we've lost the Kingston Heritage newspaper, as well as the Frontenac Gazette. We don't want to see any others being lost. And so this resolution, it's going across many municipalities. Our comparator cities that have just voted for the same resolution include Windsor just this week, Waterloo, and Hamilton. And so, those are the cities that are have already discussed it and passed this resolution. And there's about 6 others right now that are also contemplating it, and 5 others that have already passed it besides those comparator cities. Just some local examples, like during COVID in July, when we had the outbreak at the nail salon, like we in Kingston, we wanted to hear the details. And I don't think the coverage would have been that if it was only the Toronto Star and the Globe and Mail covering the story. There's just so many other examples of this, and I hope that council can support it. Thank you.
Thank you. Next is Deputy Mayor Neal.
Thank you very much. A running punchline of mine for years is, I'm so old I can remember when Bob Ray was a New Democrat. But there are other things that I remember. I remember when our daily newspaper had 7 issues a week and was a nationally and even at once an internationally award-winning newspaper. And we had at that time 3 weekly newspapers as well. It's really a shame that our local news has become so shrunken from that period when there was less population, ironically. And we're making just as much news today, but it isn't being covered. The weekly newspaper through the 80s and 90s used to do a couple of very brave things. They had an attendance record for council. How many committee meetings councillors missed, how many council meetings councillors missed. That would be valuable information for the electorate. We no longer do that. They also took key issues, a dozen or so over the year, and showed the readers exactly how every councillor voted on it. We had a much more informed electorate as a result of those things, as embarrassing as they may have been to some of us. So we need a strong and viable press. We need a press that actually does investigative journalism, which isn't something that an intern or a rookie reporter can do. So I sincerely hope that we get better news from both the existing newspapers and media today. And we do have the Kingstonist, which I think is doing a very, very good job. Online journalism, a lot of it volunteerism. But sometimes they shape the news, and the Whig picks up a story that was first reported in the Kingstonist. And those are good things. We need more of that kind of, wherever the media comes from. We need more of those kinds of reporting if we're to be an effective and democratic council. So I look forward to that improvement, and I totally applaud this motion. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Stroud.
Your worship. First, just so that I am sure that we're talking about the same thing, I just have a couple of questions. I'm maybe only one for the mover. The wording that you said, is lengthy wording for the motion. Was that, is that, speaking of writing things, did you write the entire motion and the whereas clauses and everything? And if you did, were you informed by any particular group that was asking for you to do something of this nature?
Yeah, thank you for the question, Councillor Stroud. So the resolution was first passed in the city of Waterloo at the local council level and also at the regional level. It was, this resolution came about from 3 journalists, retired journalists. And so they gave the base of the resolution. And then this is the resolution that was passed at the city of Waterloo, where then it was sent to other cities to see if they could support such a similar motion. So I changed it very slightly, and I added in the part about the Kingston Heritage and Frontenac Gazette, if that answers your question. So they gave, those 3 retired journalists gave the basis, and then Waterloo brought it as a motion. And then basically that's the same wording, the same resolutions, all those whereas clauses that all the other cities are passing right now.
Okay, great. So 3 retired journalists, and there's a bit of a movement. We've seen it happen in a few other municipalities. And am I right that this is also related to some of the people on Twitter that call themselves the ink-stained wretches? Is that correct? Yeah. Okay.
Yes, it is. But they are retired journalists. Yes.
Right. So first of all, when you say retired journalists, that gives me a lot of comfort because, like Councillor Neal, I do remember when Kingston had an independent daily newspaper that was truly independent and not just a subsidiary of the Toronto Sun conglomerate, which is what the Kingston Weekly Standard is today. It's owned by Sun Media, and it gets its marching orders from Toronto. Journalists that work for the Kingston Weekly Standard will privately complain that they're not allowed to report everything they'd like to report. This is the truth. We don't have an independent source of news in Kingston at all. Some people like the Kingstonist, but if you look at the owners of the Kingstonist, you quickly see special interests in an ownership group, mortgage sellers, developers, and the like. So, and when you talk about advertising in newspapers and in news outlets, of course, that's where you get your revenue, but that's also where you get your bias. And what the independent journalist does, regardless of the outlet that he or she works for, is they bring their journalistic integrity that they learned at school to the job, and they try to balance the two. They've got the information coming from the community, which is the raw truth, the raw material that you use to make news, but you've also got your editor and your your bosses telling you what you can and can't say and how to say it and whether they kill your story or not. So it's a balancing act all the time if you're a journalist. And so separating the bias from the information is actually up to the reader. And you can, once you know a journalist and you've seen them cover something in an objective way, then you can become more comfortable with the reporting and you don't have to fact check it quite as much. But in general, all news today, if you don't fact check it yourself, you run the risk of buying, buying what they're selling, basically. And so what I was concerned about this motion is, what is it in this motion that actually gets us back to those days Councillor Neil was talking about, where journalism, where there was investigative journalism, when there was real journalism, where you could count on the news to give you the information from an independent source that wasn't subject to so much bias. So what is it in this motion that gets us in that direction? At this point, the only thing that I can separate from what I've heard from Councillor Sanek is that it's 3 retired journalists that have started this movement, presumably from the viewpoint of someone who has journalistic integrity. If that's the way it goes, then it could be of great benefit to the community, but it could also, if it ends up, deepening the pockets of those who are already in control of the news media, which is a very small number of conglomerates that control the news today, it's not very beneficial at all. So this is a double-edged sword that we're debating here today. I'm tempted to go with it because of what Councillor Sanek said about who started this movement. But if we expect the federal government to give us something that's unbiased, come on, we know that's not going to happen. So, so really the proof will be in what the legislation that we're asking for actually looks like. So this is only the first step, and this is the beginning of a long campaign to move back to independent investigative style journalism. And I sincerely hope we have that in Kingston one day again, because we don't have it at all today. Thank you.
Okay, is there anybody else that wishes to speak to this motion? Deputy Mayor, will you take the chair?
I will indeed, and I recognize you.
Thank you. I'm just going to make a couple of comments based on something from the previous speaker. I just want to commend every one of the local journalists that we have here in Kingston. I think that they all do the very best that they can with what they have, and I know that certainly Kingston is better for it. So certainly want to give a shout out to all of our local outlets, and certainly appreciate being able to work with them. Thank you very much.
Thank you, and I return the chair.
Okay, Councillor Sanek, if you have the last word, if there's anything else you want to add. So we will call the vote. All those in favor? Opposed? And that's carried. Okay, moving on. Are there any notices of motion? Okay, Mr. Clerk, ask for minutes, please.
Moved by Councillor McLaren, seconded by Councillor Doherty, that the minutes of City Council meeting number 2020-22 held Tuesday, August 11th, 2020 be confirmed.
All those in favor? Opposed? And that's carried. Tabling of documents, the number of communications. Is there any other business? Mr. Clerk, I'll ask for bylaws, please.
Moved by Councillor Chappelle, seconded by Councillor Holland, that bylaws 1 through 3 and 5 be given their first and second reading.
All those in favor? Opposed? And that's carried.
Moved by Councillor Chappelle, seconded by Councillor Holland, that bylaws 3 through 5 be given their third reading.
All those in favor? Opposed? And that's carried. Okay, motion to adjourn, please. Moved by Councillor Chappelle, seconded by Deputy Mayor Neal. Deputy Mayor Neal, point of order.
Exactly. I think you skipped over other business.
No, I did a call for other business. We've already gone through the bylaws, Councillor Neal.
It's on the agenda. It was never called for.
Yes, it was. If I can just get a confirmation from council that I did call it for other business. So I'm sorry, Councillor Neal, but we are in a motion to adjourn at this point. Okay, moved by Councillor Chappelle, seconded by Councillor Osterhoff. Thank you. Okay, all those in favor? Opposed? And that's carried. Thanks very much, everybody. Have a good evening.